just kind of talked about some of the structures for our signatures, but this one we're going to go ahead and build some of these into our code. So I went ahead and created a program called project called methods here, and I have a start method that has our main public static void main, and I have a method library, but we're going to spend the next few minutes in the start one. I don't want to be jumping back and forth between the various classes, so we're going to stay in this one. So we're going to make a private one. Okay, this is going to have an access modifier that's specific to this class. I can only access this private one when I'm inside of it. I'm going to go ahead and make it static, which means I will not need an object of this type to access it. And I'm going to return an integer when I get done. So we'll go ahead and give it a name. We'll go ahead and call this do method 1 because we don't know. We're just kind of playing around with some stuff. This one's not going to take any parameters, so I do not need to pass anything inside of it. So since it's going to return something, Eclipse is already telling us that this method must return a result of a type int. We specifically says that it needs to return an int. So we're going to have to return an integer. And we can return any integer we want. Eventually your code will actually pick what integer it returns, but we can go ahead and hard code that one to do what it needs to do, which is return the data type. Now to access this particular method, we can just call do method 1, and I would get access to that particular one, and I would return a 4. Now we're going to talk about return values later on, so for now I'm going to leave it as it is, but we're going to have to do something when that return value comes into it. The next one, I'm going to leave out the access modifier. I'm going to leave out static, and I'm just going to go right with a string. So this one's going to return a string value, and we're going to call it do method 2. This one, I'm going to have to send in some information, and I want to send in an integer called age. So this one is not, or is returning a data type, so I'm going to have to return something that's a string. So we'll go ahead and return the word Bob. So now I have a private static int one. This one is not, there's no access modifier, but it's going to default to package protected. It's not static, which means I'm going to have an object. So if I want to access do method 2 up here, I can't just do method 2. If I try to do that, it's going to say, hey, wait a minute, you're trying to access a non-static method from a static method. So to do that, I would have to create my start object. And then I can use that S that I created to then access my do method 2. The other thing that I have to do is I have to pass it a piece of information. So I can't access this method unless I meet this contract requirement, which means I have to send it a number. So to meet that, I'm going to go ahead and just give it a 2. That 2 will go into age, which meets the requirement, and it's going to return Bob, which is a requirement based on this part of it. Not very common that you don't see an access modifier, but I did want to at least cover the fact that you can do that part of it. So that's another method. Let's go ahead and do one more. This one is going to be a private, and it's not going to be static, and we're going to not return anything, and we'll call it do method 3. And this one's going to take 2 parameters. It's going to have to take a double, and we're going to call that GPA, and it's also going to take a string, which we'll call name. So we got to send 2 pieces of information to this one. And we're going to play a lot more around with these various pieces as they come in and out of here. But this one does not need return type because I have a void, so I do not need to return anything. When I get done with this method, it will automatically return to where it is called. So I can use the return keyword, but I can't send anything back with it. It's not allowed to. If I try to put something in here, like return 4.5, you'll notice that that's not allowed. It's going to say that void methods cannot return a value. But if I just use return, I don't have a problem with it. I just can't return a value. So how do I call this one down here? Well, it's not static, so I'm going to use the object that I created. We're going to go ahead and call do method 3 and go ahead and try to access it that way. Eclipse is going, wait a minute, you're trying to access this do method 3, but you are required to send me 2 pieces of information. And Eclipse is warning you going that there's no there's no do method 3 that has a type of 0 arguments. I don't have a method called that does not take something. So I would have to pass in a 3.9 grade point average and a name of Tom. Now 3.9 can go into GPA because that requires a double, which 3.9 is, and Tom can go into name because that's a string, which is a requirement that goes into that piece of it. So anyway, so these are some various method signatures. There's actually one that you've been using multiple times. We have a private one here that's static, which means I don't need an object, but I do have to return something because it's saying the return type for this one is a -4. I have another one that has no access modifier, so it's defaults to the package protected. There is no static, which means I will need an object. It's going to return a data type of a string, which means I have to return a string down here. I give it a name. This one also requires that I have a parameter getting passed in, so I had to meet that requirement. So 2 will go into age, and I'm returning a string. And the last one here is a private one, void, do method 3. I'm not going to return anything. I can use the return keyword. It is going to be implied when I get done with this method. It's going to automatically return back to where it left, but I can use the return keyword. I just can't give it a value. And this one requires that I have 2 pieces of information going in, 3.9 and Tom. 3.9 goes into GPA, Tom goes into string, and everything is good. So I know that's a lot of information, but we're going to break it apart and play around with it a lot more over the next couple lessons.